Long before written history, people told stories of a flood that ended an age. They spoke of waters that swallowed cities, of fire that fell from the sky, and of survivors who carried fragments of knowledge into a new world. These stories appear in Mesopotamia, in India, in the Americas, and in islands across the sea. Each describes destruction, but also memory of what came before the waters rose. Today, ruins of impossible scale remain scattered across the earth. Blocks weighing hundreds of tons lie fitted with precision. Spirals, serpents, and crosses repeat in carvings separated by oceans. Beneath the sea, steps and platforms rest in silence, as if still guarding the edges of lost coasts. What connects these fragments is not certainty, but memory. They point to a world erased, yet never fully forgotten. A civilization that may have lived before the flood, whose knowledge lingers only in stone, in story, and in myth. Join us as we follow these traces, the legacy of a lost world and the mysteries it left behind. The foundations before the flood. At the edge of the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon lies a platform of stone so vast that later builders could not explain it. When the Romans built their temples at Baalbek in the 1st century, they used the foundation as if it had always been there. Yet the foundation itself was already ancient, and it carried blocks of limestone larger than anything else known from antiquity. The largest, called the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, weighs more than 1,000 tons. Another nearby is even heavier. Together they form part of a terrace whose origins are unknown. Local legend long held that the giants built it, or that it belonged to a forgotten age before the flood. Travelers in the 19th century marveled at the size of the blocks, noting that modern machines could barely move them. Archaeologists agreed the stones were cut in antiquity, but the reasons for their size and the methods by which they were shifted remain without clear answer. This is where the idea of a lost civilization begins, at sites where the scale of construction seems out of place. Baalbek is not alone. Around the world, there are stones too large for their settings, alignments too precise for chance, and walls that seem to belong to people who are no longer remembered. In the highlands of Peru stands Sacsayhuaman, a fortress-like complex above Cusco. Its walls are made of immense blocks of andesite, some weighing over 100 tons. They fit together with such accuracy that even today, no mortar is needed. Each stone has multiple sides, carved to lock perfectly into its neighbors. The Spanish chroniclers of the 16th century asked the Inca who had built it. The Inca replied that it was not their work. They said it had been built by people before them in a time beyond memory. The Spaniards wrote these words, yet dismissed them as myth. Archaeology later assigned the walls to the Inca, but the scale and technique remain puzzling. In the Andes, there are more puzzles. At Ollantaytambo, a site north of Cusco, giant red porphyry blocks were quarried across a river valley and dragged up a steep slope. Each weighs dozens of tons. How they were transported across uneven ground and then set in place on a mountain terrace is not explained. Farther south, at Pumapunku in Bolivia, stones lie scattered as if by an ancient upheaval. They are cut with precision grooves, right angles, and drill-like holes. Some blocks are shaped like interlocking H-forms, suggesting a complex design. Archaeologists date them to the Tiwanaku culture more than 1,000 years ago. Yet many researchers note that the accuracy of the cuts seems beyond the stone tools known to the region. The connection to a pre-flood civilization comes from myth as much as from stone. Cultures across the world describe a great inundation that ended an earlier age. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh tells of a deluge sent by the gods. In the Hebrew Bible, Noah's Ark preserves life during 40 days of rising water. In India, ancient texts speak of Manu warned by a divine fish to build a vessel. In Mesoamerica, the Maya and Aztec described worlds destroyed by water before the present era began. The details differ, but the theme is the same: a civilization erased by flood, leaving behind fragments. To those who see the great stones as remnants of that era, the myths and the monuments reinforce each other. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, travelers and early archaeologists often speculated that these structures belonged to a people forgotten by history. The discoveries at Baalbek Sacsayhuaman, and Pumapunku were grouped together as evidence of builders who may have lived before the known civilizations of Mesopotamia or Egypt. As archaeology advanced, most scholars attributed the sites to cultures we can name: the Romans at Baalbek, the Inca in Peru, the Tiwanaku in Bolivia. Yet the scale and difficulty of the work continued to puzzle observers. Geologists added another layer. Around 11,600 years ago, at the end of the last ice age, global sea levels rose rapidly as glaciers melted. Coastlines shifted, and many low-lying areas were submerged. This date matches the timelines of many flood myths. Some researchers suggest that advanced communities may have existed on those lost coastlines, erased when the seas rose. If they built in stone, only fragments remain on higher ground. Examples appear beneath the sea as well. Off the coast of Japan, at Yonaguni, divers found stepped stone formations that resemble terraces and platforms. Debate continues whether they are natural or human-made, but their scale recalls the unfinished or ruined monuments on land. In India's Gulf of Khumbat, sonar surveys revealed structures on the seabed that some describe as walls and foundations. If they are artificial, they date to a time when the sea level was far lower. The concept of a pre-flood civilization rests on this combination of evidence: immense stones whose methods of placement are unclear, myths of a great inundation, and underwater structures that suggest habitation before the seas rose. Mainstream archaeology remains cautious, attributing most sites to known cultures using methods that are not yet fully understood. Yet the persistence of the anomalies keeps the question alive. For local communities, the legends never disappeared. In Lebanon, the people of Baalbek told stories of giants who laid the foundation stones. In the Andes, the descendants of the Inca still say that Sacsayhuaman belonged to a race before them. In the Pacific, flood myths are recited as memories of ancestors carried away by rising seas. These voices, combined with the physical remains, sustain the idea of a world that ended but left fragments behind. The stones remain visible today. At Baalbek, visitors stand before blocks weighing more than 1,000 tons. In Peru, tourists walk among walls of interlocking shapes. In Bolivia, they trace grooves cut with precision into andesite. These are not lost artifacts. Buried in the ground, they are still present, open to view, their origins debated but undeniable. The question is not whether they exist, but how they came to be. The builders may have been cultures we can name, using methods now forgotten. Or they may have been part of an older age, destroyed in the floods remembered by myth. What endures is the scale of their work, and the sense that fragments of a civilization older than recorded history still stand in stone. The forgotten architects of stone. When archaeologists study the great ruins of antiquity, they look for tool marks, quarry sites, and transport routes. These are the traces that tell how builders worked. Yet at several sites, the evidence raises more questions than answers. Stones weighing hundreds of tons are positioned with accuracy beyond what wooden rollers and ropes should allow. Surfaces are cut with sharp edges that resist explanation with stone hammers and copper chisels. Across the world, traditions speak of builders who possessed knowledge now lost. They are remembered as giants, demigods, or simply as a race who lived before the flood. At Baalbek in Lebanon, the terrace supporting the Roman temple complex contains blocks cut from a nearby quarry. The largest is estimated at 1,650 tons, still partly embedded in bedrock. To move such a stone, even on a gentle slope, would require force beyond ordinary teams of workers. Engineers today calculate that dozens of modern cranes would be needed, yet the block was cut with precision, its sides squared, as if intended to be placed with others. Why it was left unused remains a mystery. In Egypt, the Ossuarian at Abydos presents another puzzle. This subterranean monument is built from granite pillars, some weighing more than 100 tons. The style is different from the decorated temples above. Archaeologists note that the Ossuarian looks older, its walls rougher, as if from a different age. Ancient texts attributed it to Seti I, but many researchers believe the pharaoh only restored an older structure. The pillars, laid with exact alignment, suggest builders working with skill and purpose. In Peru, the walls of Sacsayhuaman above Cusco show interlocking stones with complex angles. Some have as many as 12 sides, each fitted perfectly to the others. The Inca are credited with the work, yet Spanish chroniclers recorded the Inca themselves, saying they inherited the structures. Modern experiments using stone hammers produce crude joints, not the seamless fits seen at the site. The scale suggests techniques we do not fully understand. At Pumapunku in Bolivia, the scattered blocks reveal another level of precision. Some are shaped into right-angled H-forms that appear designed to interlock. Others carry grooves and drill-like holes cut with exact spacing. Archaeologists assign the site to the Tiwanaku culture, yet the methods of shaping and moving the blocks remain debated. The andesite stone is hard, requiring tools stronger than copper to achieve such sharp lines. Legends from these regions consistently speak of earlier builders. In the Andes, traditions describe the Viracocha, a race of bearded figures who brought knowledge and built in stone before vanishing. In the Near East, myths speak of the Nephilim, the giants before the flood. In Mesopotamia, kings listed in the Sumerian king list are said to have ruled for thousands of years before the Great Deluge. Each culture placed the memory of lost architects in a distant, unreachable time. These accounts are not treated as history by mainstream archaeology, but they show how ancient peoples explain monuments beyond their own skill. When the Inca said they did not build Sacsayhuaman, they were not denying their ability to build at all. They were pointing to something older. When the Romans built at Baalbek, they did not claim the terrace as their own work. They built upon it, acknowledging that what came before belonged to another age. Transport remains one of the greatest puzzles. To move a block weighing hundreds of tons requires level ground, strong sledges, and teams of workers. Some sites show ramps, but these do not fully explain the scale. At Baalbek, the quarry lies uphill from the terrace. Moving blocks downhill is easier, yet controlling their motion would be dangerous. At other sites, stones had to be lifted uphill, across rivers, or onto terraces. Experiments with ropes and rollers move smaller blocks, but not those weighing over 1,000 tons. Cutting and shaping are equally mysterious. Grooves at Pumapunku resemble work done with drills, yet no evidence of metal tools capable of cutting andesite has been found. The joints at Sacsayhuaman suggest careful planning and measurement, but the tools of the Inca were limited to stone hammers. In Egypt, granite pillars show smooth surfaces and sharp corners produced without visible tool marks. These anomalies have led some to suggest lost methods of working stone, perhaps with techniques we cannot yet replicate. Some researchers point to sound, water, or other natural forces as possible aids. Others argue that large teams of labourers could achieve more than we assume. Yet the questions remain. Why build with stones so large when smaller ones would suffice? Why shape them with such precision when rougher work would stand as well? The answer may be cultural pride, or it may be evidence of knowledge we no longer possess. Flood myths connect these sites into a single pattern. The builders, whoever they were, are remembered as having vanished in a catastrophe. The flood of Mesopotamian, biblical, and Indian tradition coincides with the end of the last ice age, when seas rose rapidly and coastlines were submerged. If civilizations existed along those coasts, much of their evidence now lies underwater. The stones on higher ground may be the fragments left behind. Underwater ruins add weight to this idea. In the Gulf of Khambut in India, sonar surveys revealed structures on the seabed resembling walls and platforms. Off Japan, at Yonaguni, divers found terraces that resemble steps and foundations. Debate continues whether these are natural or artificial, but their scale recalls the megaliths on land. If they are man-made, they would date to a time when sea levels were far lower, before the flood myths began. The forgotten architects of stone remain unnamed. We know their work through monuments that later peoples could not fully explain. Romans called them giants, Inca called them ancestors. Modern archaeology assigns their works to cultures we can document, yet the questions persist. The stones are too large, the cuts too precise, the alignments too deliberate. Something has been lost between their age and ours. What survives are the structures themselves. Blocks of 1,000 tons at Baalbek, interlocking walls in Peru, precision cuts in Bolivia, granite pillars in Egypt. These are not fragments hidden beneath earth, they stand in the open, undeniable. They tell us that someone, at some time, built on a scale we can still see, though not fully understand, whether they belonged to a civilization before the flood, or to cultures we know using methods now forgotten. Their work marks the landscape with puzzles that remain unsolved. They are the architects we cannot name, remembered only through the impossible stones they left behind. The stones beneath the sea. Beneath the surface of oceans and seas, there are places where stone formations appear to rest in silence. Some resemble walls, others step terraces or long roads. Divers and sonar surveys have revealed shapes that suggest human design, yet their locations are far below present sea level. If they are artificial, they belong to an earlier time, before coastlines shifted at the end of the last ice age. These sites are often linked to the idea of a civilization that existed before the flood, myths remembered across cultures. Off the coast of Japan, near Yonaguni, a massive formation was discovered in 1986 by a diver searching for hammerhead sharks. He found himself above a stepped platform of sandstone rising from the seabed. The structure, nearly 150 meters long, included sharp edges, terraces, and flat surfaces. Some blocks appeared stacked, others carved. Photographs showed a shape resembling a pyramid with wide steps descending into the depths. The formation lies 25 meters beneath the surface, at a depth reached only after the seas rose at the end of the Ice Age, more than 10,000 years ago. Scholars debated its origin. Some geologists argued it was natural, created by currents and fractures in sandstone. Others pointed to straight lines, right angles, and what looked like staircases. Local divers reported carvings on some surfaces, though these remain disputed. If Yonaguni is artificial, it suggests builders active long before Japan's earliest known cultures. If natural, it remains an uncanny example of geology producing forms that mimic design. In the Gulf of Khamhat, off India's western coast, sonar surveys in 2000 and one revealed shapes on the seabed at depths of 30 to 40 meters. The formations covered several square kilometers and included what appeared to be walls, platforms, and a grid-like arrangement. Samples dredged from the site contained artifacts later dated to nearly 9,000 years ago, though some researchers questioned the results. If accurate, the structures predate the Indus Valley civilization by thousands of years. Critics argue the formations may be natural, but the regularity of the shapes continues to invite speculation. Farther south, near the island of Malta, divers found stone structures beneath the Mediterranean. At depths of 20 meters, blocks lay arranged as if part of an ancient building. Malta itself is home to megalithic temples dated to 5,000 years ago, some of the oldest in Europe. The underwater finds may connect to these, or they may belong to a much earlier phase, now hidden by the sea. The Caribbean has its own accounts. Off Bimini in the Bahamas, divers discovered in 1968 a line of stones on the seabed arranged like a road. Known as the Bimini Road, it stretches for hundreds of meters, with blocks that appear shaped and placed. Some suggest it is a natural beach rock formation fractured into rectangular shapes. Others believe it is the remnant of a harbour or roadway built thousands of years ago. The discovery gained attention when linked to prophecies about Atlantis, though archaeology remains cautious. Cuba's northern coast has also produced reports. In 2001, a Canadian company using sonar equipment detected formations at depths of more than 600 meters near the Guanahacoibes Peninsula. The shapes included pyramids, roads, and platforms. At such depth, if they are man-made, they must date back more than 10,000 years before the end of the Ice Age. The extreme depth makes investigation difficult, and little confirmation has followed. Yet the images stirred interest as possible evidence of a lost coastal city submerged when sea levels rose. These discoveries connect to the global record of rising seas. At the end of the Ice Age, between 12,000 and 8,000 years ago, melting glaciers caused oceans to rise by more than 100 meters. Vast areas of coastal land disappeared. River valleys, harbors, and settlements would have been flooded. If early civilizations developed along coasts, much of their evidence now lies beneath the sea. Flood myths across cultures may recall these events. In India's ancient texts, the Mahabharata describes cities lost to the ocean. In Polynesian tradition, islands once inhabited are said to have sunk beneath waves. In Mesopotamia, the flood destroyed the antediluvian kings. The underwater structures, whether natural or artificial, echo these memories. Skeptics emphasize natural processes. Sandstone fractures, beach rock formations, and tectonic shifts can create shapes that look artificial. Erosion, currents, and earthquakes alter coastlines. The challenge is separating what nature produces from what people may have built. Proponents argue that some formations show too much regularity, too much alignment, to dismiss as chance. The question is not whether sea levels rose they did, but whether a civilization capable of building in stone existed before the flood. If so, only fragments remain. Terraces beneath Japan, roads in the Bahamas, walls in the Gulf of Kambat. If not, the resemblance of natural forms to architecture is coincidence amplified by imagination. What is certain is that underwater archaeology is still in its infancy. Most of the seabed remains unexplored. Technology such as sonar mapping and remotely operated vehicles has begun to reveal shapes and anomalies never seen before. As more coastlines are surveyed, more sites may appear. Some will be natural, others perhaps artificial. Each will add to the discussion of what lies beneath the sea. The stones beneath the sea are difficult to interpret, yet they invite a reflection. Human history is tied to coastlines. As the sea rose, it took with it the places where people once lived, built, and remembered. Whether the submerged formations are monuments of a lost civilization or simply the work of geology, they remind us of how much has been erased by water. The flood myths remain, the ruins on land remain, and beneath the sea, terraces, walls, and roads still rest in silence, waiting for answers. The cataclysm at the end of the Ice Age, around 12,000 years ago, the world changed in ways that reshaped the course of human history. The Ice Age, which had gripped the Northern Hemisphere for tens of thousands of years, came to an end. Vast ice sheets that once covered North America, Northern Europe, and Siberia began to melt. Sea levels rose more than 100 meters, flooding coastlines and river valleys. Entire landscapes were swallowed by the ocean, leaving behind only fragments of what once existed. In myths passed down through generations, this transformation became remembered as the Great Flood. Geological evidence records the suddenness of these changes. At the peak of the last ice age, known as the last glacial maximum, ice sheets were more than 2 kilometers thick in some regions. They locked away enough water to lower global sea levels by more than 120 meters. When warming began, the glaciers retreated, releasing their water into the oceans. The rise was not smooth or gradual. Studies of ancient shorelines and ice cores show that the process included sudden surges, known as meltwater pulses, when seas rose by several meters in only a few centuries. One of the most dramatic events occurred around 11,600 years ago, a period that coincides with the end of what geologists call the Younger Dryas. For more than 1,000 years, the Younger Dryas had been a return to near-glacial conditions after an initial warming. Then, in an abrupt shift, temperatures climbed by as much as 10 degrees Celsius within decades. Ice cores from Greenland record this change clearly, showing that the climate could transform with astonishing speed. The causes of this sudden warming remain debated. Some researchers argue that it was triggered by shifts in ocean currents as meltwater disrupted the North Atlantic. Others suggest that a comet or meteor impact may have played a role, striking ice sheets and causing widespread fires. This controversial theory, known as the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, is supported by layers of microscopic debris in sediments, though it remains unproven. Whatever the cause, the result was the rapid melting of glaciers and the flooding of coasts. As the seas rose, landscapes disappeared. The English Channel, now a body of water separating Britain from France, was once a wide river valley connecting the Thames to the Rhine. Doggerland, an area of low-lying plains in what is now the North Sea, was home to Mesolithic hunter-gatherers. Archaeological finds of tools and bones from fishing communities have been dredged from the seabed. Around 8,000 years ago, Doggerland was finally submerged, leaving only scattered islands before vanishing completely beneath the waves. In Southeast Asia, the Sunda Shelf, now covered by the waters of the South China Sea and Java Sea, was once dry land. Rivers connected the Mekong, Chao Phraya, and Irrawaddy into vast valleys that supported early populations. Rising seas drowned these lands, reshaping the geography of the region. In the Americas, the Bering Land Bridge that once connected Siberia and Alaska also disappeared, cutting off the migration route that had brought humans into the continent. Flood myths may be cultural memories of these transformations. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh tells of Utnapishtim surviving a deluge that wiped away earlier cities. In the Hebrew Bible, Noah's Ark carries pairs of animals while waters cover the earth. In India, the story of Manu describes a flood that ended one age and began another. In Mesoamerica, the Aztecs spoke of earlier suns destroyed by water. Polynesian oral traditions recall islands swallowed by the sea. These stories, separated by oceans, share the theme of civilizations undone by rising waters. The archaeological record suggests that people lived in coastal regions long before the flooding. Tools, middens, and settlement remains are found near ancient shorelines now far inland. It is likely that many early communities were situated along coasts, rivers, and estuaries where resources were abundant. When the seas rose, these places were drowned. Today, they lie beneath water, making them difficult to excavate. If advanced cultures had developed in those regions, much of their evidence would now be hidden. The possibility of such cultures has fueled speculation about a pre-flood civilization. Advocates argue that structures like Baalbek, Sacsayhuaman, and Yonaguni could be remnants of this lost world. They point to the timing of the flood myths, the abrupt climate change, and the disappearance of vast coastal areas as evidence that human history may be deeper than recorded. Mainstream archaeology acknowledges the flooding, but sees no clear proof of advanced civilizations before 10,000 years ago. Yet the absence of evidence may be due to the difficulty of searching beneath the sea. The end of the Ice Age also brought extinctions. In North America, mammoths, mastodons, and giant ground sloths vanished. In Australia, megafauna such as diprotodons disappeared earlier, but smaller extinctions continued. Some researchers argue that climate change alone caused these losses. Others suggest human hunting played a role. The collapse of ecosystems at this time adds to the image of a world transformed suddenly and permanently. For early humans, the changes were immense. Coastlines retreated, familiar hunting grounds vanished, and populations were forced inland. New tools and adaptations appeared, including farming, which began in several parts of the world around this period. It is possible that the shock of environmental change encouraged the shift from nomadic life to settled agriculture. In this sense, the cataclysm at the end of the Ice Age was not only a destruction, but also a beginning. The evidence is clear. Around 12,000 years ago, the Earth warmed rapidly, glaciers melted, seas rose, and landscapes disappeared. Whether or not a lost civilization was destroyed in the process remains uncertain. What is certain is that the event left deep marks in memory and myth. The flood became a universal story, retold in different forms, carrying the echo of real catastrophe. Today, scientists continue to study this period to understand the speed of climate change and the vulnerability of human societies. The lessons of the past are reminders that the Earth's systems can shift quickly, and that civilizations, whether ancient or modern, exist within those forces. The cataclysm at the end of the Ice Age was not a single event, but a series of transformation. Its floods reshaped the coasts, its warming ended the reign of ice, and its memory lives on in the oldest stories of humanity. In stone ruins on land and in submerged formations beneath the sea, the traces of that age may still be waiting to be uncovered. The myths of the deluge. Across the world, in cultures separated by oceans and continents, stories of a great flood appear again and again. They tell of waters rising, of civilizations erased, and of a few survivors who preserved life for the future. Scholars have long debated why these stories are so widespread. Some see them as symbolic tales of renewal, others as echoes of real disasters. When placed beside geological evidence of rising seas at the end of the Ice Age, the myths take on a different character. They may represent memories of a cataclysm that reshaped the earth and the people who lived on it. In Mesopotamia, one of the earliest written traditions describes a flood sent by the gods. The Epic of Gilgamesh, preserved on clay tablets dating to the 2nd millennium BCE, tells of Utnapishtim, a man chosen to survive when the gods decided to destroy humanity. Warned in advance, he built a vessel, loaded it with animals, and rode out the storm. When the waters receded, his boat came to rest on a mountain, and he released birds to find dry land. This story, known to the Sumerians and Akkadians, predates the Hebrew account of Noah, but contains striking similarities. In the Hebrew Bible, the book of Genesis records the flood of Noah. God, angered by the corruption of humanity, instructs Noah to build an ark and preserve his family along with pairs of animals. Rain falls for 40 days and nights, covering the earth. The ark comes to rest on the mountains of Ararat. When the waters subside, Noah releases a dove, which returns with an olive branch. The parallels to Mesopotamian myth are too close to ignore, suggesting a common origin or shared memory in the ancient Near East. In India, the story of Manu tells of a man warned by a fish of a coming flood. The fish, often identified with the god Vishnu, instructs him to build a boat. When the waters rise, the fish guides Manu's vessel to safety by towing it with a horn. After the flood recedes, Manu performs sacrifices, and from him a new age begins. The tale, preserved in the Satapatha Brahmana and later in the Puranas, links cosmic cycles with the destruction and rebirth of humanity. China has its own flood traditions. The Great Flood of Gunyu, described in early chronicles, tells of waters that covered the land for generations. Gun attempted to stop the flood, but failed. His son Yu succeeded by dredging channels and guiding the waters to the sea, founding the First Dynasty. Archaeological evidence of massive flooding along the Yellow River around 1900 BCE has led some scholars to connect this legend to real events. Yet its deeper motifs echo the same theme found elsewhere, a disaster that reshaped the land and marked the beginning of a new order. Among the indigenous peoples of the Americas, flood stories are widespread. The Maya recorded in the Popol Vuh that earlier creations of humanity were destroyed by water. The Aztec described the end of the fourth sun, when the world drowned and only a man and a woman survived by hiding in the hollow of a tree. In North America, the Hopi told of floods that forced their ancestors to seek refuge in caves before being guided to safety. The Ojibwe spoke of a deluge, after which the earth was recreated on the back of a turtle. These tales, though distinct, share the same underlying memory: waters that erased the world and began it anew. In Polynesia, flood myths are equally common. On Hawaii, traditions speak of Nu'u, a man who built a canoe with a house on it to survive a flood. In Samoa, stories recall sisters carried away by rising waters, forming new islands. Across the Pacific, the theme of survivors, carried by boats or canoes, links directly to the reality of oceanic life, yet it also mirrors the myths of Mesopotamia and India. Africa, too, preserves these accounts. In Nigeria, the Yoruba tell of a flood that covered the land until the god Obatala scattered earth on the waters to form new ground. In East Africa, some traditions describe floods sent as punishment, leaving only a few to repopulate the earth. Though less detailed than the Mesopotamian or Indian accounts, the same motifs appear: destruction, survival, and renewal. Scholars have long debated why flood myths are so universal. One explanation is that floods are common disasters. Rivers overflow, storms strike, and local communities are affected. Over time, these experiences may have grown into stories of global inundation. Another explanation is psychological. Floods symbolize cleansing and rebirth, a way of explaining cycles of destruction and renewal. But the global distribution and shared details suggest more. The timing of sea level rise at the end of the Ice Age offers a possible origin. Between 12,000 and 8,000 years ago, coastlines changed dramatically. settlements in river valleys and coastal plains would have been lost. Communities displaced by rising seas may have carried with them the memory of destruction. These memories, retold for generations, became the myths of the deluge. The consistency of themes: divine warning, survival in a boat, mountains as refuge, and the preservation of animals points to a common experience, remembered differently in each culture. Myths also preserve fragments of geography. In Mesopotamian and biblical accounts, the ark comes to rest on a mountain. In Indian texts, Manu's boat is tied to the Himalayas. In Polynesian stories, survivors land on islands formed by volcanic peaks. Mountains stand above the flood, serving as symbols of continuity when the lowlands are lost. This detail may reflect the reality of rising seas, where high ground became refuge as plains drowned. The flood myths do not prove the existence of a lost pre-flood civilization, but they give weight to the possibility. If such a civilization existed along ancient coasts, its destruction by rising waters would explain why little remains. The stories of survivors may be cultural memories of those who carried fragments of knowledge into the New World. Whether symbolic or historical, the deluge myths preserve echoes of real catastrophe. What makes them compelling is their persistence. Thousands of years after the events, they remain central to cultural traditions. They appear in sacred texts, epic poems, and oral histories. They speak not only of destruction, but also of survival, of the resilience of people who carried memory through disaster. The myths of the deluge link humanity across continents. They remind us that beneath different languages and traditions lies a shared story, that once waters rose and changed the world forever. Whether seen as allegory or as memory of the end of the Ice Age, they remain among the oldest and most enduring tales of humanity. The first cities after the flood. When the waters receded and coastlines stabilized, human societies entered a new phase of history. The period after 10,000 BCE saw the beginnings of agriculture, permanent settlements, and eventually the rise of cities. Archaeologists describe this as the Neolithic Revolution, but in traditions that recall a great flood, these new beginnings are sometimes seen as the continuation of knowledge from before the catastrophe. The question remains whether the first cities were entirely new creations or whether they preserved fragments of older, forgotten worlds. In Mesopotamia, the fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers became the heart of early civilization. Sites such as Eridu, Uruk, and Ur are among the oldest cities known. Eridu, traditionally considered the first city, dates back to around 5,400 BCE. Archaeologists uncovered layers of temples built atop one another, suggesting continuity of sacred space over millennia. Sumerian tradition described Eridu as the city of the gods, established in the earliest days. The Sumerian king list, a document inscribed on clay tablets, records rulers said to have reigned for thousands of years before the flood. After the flood, kingship was said to have descended again from heaven, beginning with Eridu. This text reflects a belief that the flood separated two worlds, with the new one carrying echoes of the old. Uruk, flourishing by 4000 BCE, became the largest city of its time. It contained monumental temples, administrative buildings, and walls stretching for kilometers. Writing emerged here in the form of cuneiform, used to record trade, offerings, and law. The epic hero Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, is linked to both the city and the flood tradition. The scale of Uruk suggests more than gradual growth. Its planning, temples, and writing system give the impression of a society with inherited knowledge, perhaps remembered from before the flood myth. In Anatolia, the site of Çatalhöyük, dating to around 7,500 BCE, shows a dense settlement with houses built wall to wall. Murals, figurines, and evidence of organized trade point to a community with shared beliefs and structured life. Although not a city in the later Mesopotamian sense, Çatalhöyük represents a stage between village and city. It appeared soon after the end of the Ice Age, raising the question of how rapidly humans organized themselves after such upheaval. Göbekli Tepe, also in Anatolia, predates both Çatalhöyük and Mesopotamian cities. Its great stone pillars, arranged in circles, date to as early as 9,600 BCE. Carved with images of animals and symbols, the site suggests ceremonial purpose. Archaeologists note that it was built by hunter-gatherers, not farmers, yet its construction required coordination, labor, and planning, usually associated with settled societies. The builders deliberately buried the site after centuries of use, leaving it preserved beneath soil until its discovery in the 1992. Göbekli Tepe's age places it near the end of the Younger Dryas, linking it to the period of sudden climate change and flooding. For some researchers, it is evidence of knowledge carried through the cataclysm. In the Indus Valley, cities such as Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa emerged around 2600 BCE. They featured grid-like layouts, drainage systems, and standardized weights. The sophistication of these cities has puzzled archaeologists, as they appeared without clear evidence of earlier developmental stages. While mainstream explanations see them as the product of local innovation, others suggest continuity from traditions far older, perhaps even from before the flood. The Indus cities show that advanced urban life was not unique to Mesopotamia, but part of a wider pattern across regions touched by the flood myths. Egypt provides another example of sudden emergence. Around 3100 BCE, the first pharaohs unified the Nile Valley. Monumental building followed rapidly, culminating in the pyramids of the Old Kingdom. Some researchers see Egypt's sudden development as a continuation of knowledge inherited from an earlier age. Myths told of gods and semi-divine rulers who reigned before the dynasties. Lists of kings recorded reigns stretching back thousands of years, echoing the Sumerian king list. Whether symbolic or historical, these texts suggest that the Egyptians, like the Sumerians, remembered a time before the flood. Archaeologists studying these sites emphasize that human development was complex and gradual. Agriculture took millennia to spread. Cities grew from villages through trade and surplus. Yet the sudden appearance of monumental sites like Göbekli Tepe or the rapid rise of urban centers like Uruk suggests something more than slow evolution. It suggests bursts of organization, as if knowledge was reactivated after a long pause. Flood myths reinforce this interpretation. In Mesopotamia, kingship was said to have descended again after the flood. In India, Manu preserved wisdom to begin a new age. In Mesoamerica, survivors of earlier creations carried traditions into the next. The myths imply continuity, that something survived the cataclysm and was passed on. The first cities may represent not entirely new beginnings, but the reappearance of older ideas in new landscapes. Evidence of continuity can be seen in symbols. At Göbekli Tepe, carvings of animals and abstract signs resemble later motifs found in Mesopotamian and Anatolian cultures. In the Indus Valley, undeciphered script appears with symbols similar to those found in Mesopotamia, suggesting a shared legacy. In Egypt, sacred geometry and astronomical alignments appear from the earliest monuments. Such patterns raise the possibility of knowledge transmitted across generations, surviving through the flood. The question remains whether this knowledge came from a lost civilization or from cultural memory preserved orally. Archaeology cannot confirm a forgotten advanced society before the flood, but it does reveal sudden and unexplained leaps in organization. The first cities stand as milestones that appear too quickly after the cataclysm to be entirely new inventions. For those who lived through the floods, rebuilding must have been a daunting task. Coastlines shifted, fertile valleys vanished, and populations were displaced. Yet within a few millennia, cities rose with planning, temples, and writing. Whether these achievements were entirely new or drawn from memory, they reveal resilience and continuity. The first cities after the flood tell us that humanity did not begin again from nothing. Something endured, knowledge of building, of ritual, of order. The stones of Göbekli Tepe, the temples of Eridu, the streets of Harappa, and the pyramids of Egypt may all represent fragments of continuity between two worlds, the one lost to rising seas and the one that followed. The survival of knowledge. When the first civilizations emerged after the floods, they did not only build cities and temples, they also carried with them fragments of knowledge that seem advanced for their time. Astronomy, mathematics, and geometry appear suddenly in the archaeological record, suggesting either rapid innovation or the preservation of older traditions. These sciences were essential for agriculture, navigation, and ritual, and they appear in forms too precise to be dismissed as accidental. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerians recorded astronomical observations on clay tablets more than 4,000 years ago. They tracked the movements of planets and stars, noted eclipses, and developed a calendar divided into 12 months. The division of the circle into 360 degrees, still used today, comes from their sexagesimal, or base 60, system of counting. Scholars debate whether this system arose independently or reflects knowledge inherited from earlier traditions. The sudden sophistication of Sumerian mathematics has long been seen as one of the mysteries of ancient history. Egypt also reveals evidence of advanced knowledge. The alignment of the pyramids at Giza is precise to within a fraction of a degree with the cardinal directions. The Great Pyramid incorporates ratios that approximate pi and the golden ratio. The design suggests not only architectural skill, but also knowledge of geometry and astronomy. The orientation of temples along the Nile also reflects solar and stellar alignments, ensuring that rituals matched cosmic cycles. Such precision points to traditions preserved across generations, rooted in observations far older than the dynasties themselves. In the Indus Valley, cities such as Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa were laid out on grids with standardized measurements. Bricks used in construction were uniform, suggesting centralized planning and mathematical control. Seals from the civilization depict symbols that may have astronomical meaning. Though the Indus script remains undeciphered, the presence of uniform standards across a vast region indicates advanced planning and shared knowledge. In Mesoamerica, long after the Ice Age floods, the Maya developed a calendar system that rivaled those of the Old World in accuracy. They tracked the cycles of Venus and predicted eclipses with precision. The long count calendar extended for thousands of years into past and future, reflecting a deep concern with time on cosmic scales. Though the Maya flourished much later than Mesopotamia or Egypt, their achievements suggest that astronomical traditions may have been preserved independently across continents, carried in oral memory from much earlier times. Archaeological evidence shows that knowledge was embedded in monument. At Stonehenge in England, begun around 3000 BCE, the stones are aligned to the solstices, marking the longest and shortest days of the year. The builders understood the solar cycle well enough to orient massive stones to precise points on the horizon. Other megalithic sites across Europe, such as Carnac in France and Newgrange in Ireland, also reveal astronomical alignment. These structures suggest that people emerging from the upheavals of the Ice Age carried forward an interest in the skies. The sudden appearance of advanced knowledge raises the question of survival. How did early societies, often described as simple agricultural communities, develop mathematics and astronomy so quickly? One answer is continuity. Oral traditions, preserved across generations, may have carried fragments of pre-flood knowledge. Survivors of displaced coastal communities could have passed down observations of stars and seasons. When new societies formed, this knowledge was embedded in their planning and ritual. Flood myths often link survival with instruction. In Mesopotamia, Utnapishtim is warned by the gods and given knowledge to build a vessel. In India, Manu is guided by the fish, a divine helper. In Mesoamerica, survivors of earlier creations are told how to rebuild. These myths may symbolize the preservation of wisdom across catastrophe. The ark, the boat, or the fish may represent the carrying of knowledge through the waters of destruction. Ancient lists of rulers also hint at survival. The Sumerian king list divides history into two parts, before the flood and after the flood. Kings before the flood are said to have reigned for thousands of years, suggesting either mythic exaggeration or memory of a different kind of time. After the flood, kingship resumes, but the list preserves continuity between the two worlds. Egypt's king lists also record rulers before the dynasties, sometimes described as gods or semi-divine beings. These texts suggest that memory of earlier knowledge was woven into the authority of later rulers. Symbols may also carry continuity. At Göbekli Tepe, carved more than 11,000 years ago, images of animals and abstract signs appear on massive stone pillars. Some researchers suggest these carvings may represent constellations or cosmic events. If so, they indicate that astronomical traditions already existed at the dawn of agriculture. Later, cultures may have inherited these traditions, embedding them in calendars and temples. Mathematics appears early in surprising ways. The Ashango bone, found in Central Africa and dated to more than 20,000 years ago, is carved with notches arranged in sequences that resemble multiplication or prime numbers. If intentional, it suggests numerical awareness long before formal civilizations. In Mesopotamia, clay tablets show advanced calculations by 2000 BCE, including methods for solving quadratic equations. Such sudden sophistication implies either rapid invention or older roots. The preservation of geometry is seen in the design of monuments. The Great Pyramid's proportions encode mathematical constants. Megalithic sites in Britain show circles and ellipses laid out with precision. The Indus Valley cities follow grids with right angles. These examples suggest that knowledge of measurement and proportion was carried across time, perhaps through builders' traditions or priestly orders. Skeptics argue that early societies could develop astronomy and mathematics on their own. Observing the stars requires only patience, and simple counting can grow into more complex systems. Yet the global pattern, with advanced knowledge appearing in widely separated cultures soon after the Ice Age, suggests that something more than chance may be involved. The consistency of themes' alignment to solstices, use of geometry, division of time points to shared traditions. If a pre-flood civilization existed, its legacy may not be found in ruins alone, but in the sciences preserved by survivors. Flood myths emphasize survival not only of people, but also of order. The Ark is not just a vessel of life, but a container of knowledge. The first cities may have been built not only with stone, but also with memory. What survives in the monuments and tablets of ancient civilizations may be fragments of an older legacy. Astronomy, mathematics, and geometry appear as sudden achievements, yet they may be the continuation of knowledge carried across waters and through generations. The survival of knowledge, hidden within myth and preserved in stone, may be the clearest link between the world before the flood and the civilizations that rose afterward. The giants in memory. In many traditions around the world, the great works of stone are not credited to ordinary humans. Instead, they are said to have been built by giants, figures of immense strength who lived in earlier ages. These stories appear in Europe, the Middle East, the Americas, and the Pacific. They are not identical, yet they share a theme. The largest and most difficult constructions are explained as the work of beings greater than ourselves. Whether symbolic, mythic, or a memory of earlier peoples, the figure of the giant persists wherever megaliths rise from the earth. In the Hebrew Bible, the Nephilim are described as the offspring of the sons of God and the daughters of men. They were mighty and renowned, living in the days before the flood. Later passages describe giants such as the Anakim and the Rephaim inhabiting Canaan. The image is of beings larger and stronger than ordinary humans, remembered as remnants of an earlier world. Some writers linked these giants directly to the megaliths scattered across the Levant, suggesting that only such figures could have moved the stones. Mesopotamian traditions also recall giant builders. The Sumerian king list records rulers before the flood whose reigns lasted thousands of years, hinting at figures more than human. In epic poetry, heroes of immense size and strength, such as Gilgamesh, are portrayed as part divine, capable of deeds beyond ordinary men. The blending of giant stature with ancient kingship may reflect a memory of builders who seemed larger than later generations. In the Andes, the Inca told the Spanish that the great walls of Sacsayhuaman and other megalithic sites were built by giants in a forgotten age. Chroniclers recorded their words, noting that the Inca did not claim the works as their own. Legends spoke of Viracocha, a bearded god who created giants. These beings were said to have raised immense stones before being destroyed by a flood. The story parallels Near Eastern myths, where giants also lived before the waters rose. In Greece, the Titans were remembered as the elder gods, overthrown by Zeus and the Olympians. The Cyclopes, giant one-eyed smiths, forged weapons for the gods and were credited with building massive walls. Ancient Greeks looked at the huge stones of Mycenaean fortresses and called them Cyclopean masonry, believing only giants could have placed them. The myth provided an explanation for structures whose scale surpassed the abilities of later builders. Northern Europe preserved similar traditions. In Britain and Ireland, megalithic tombs and standing stones were called the work of giants. Geoffrey of Monmouth, writing in the 12th century, claimed that Stonehenge had been brought from Ireland by giants before being re-erected in England by Merlin. Folklore linked every great stone circle to beings larger and stronger than men. The idea was not that humans could not build, but that the greatest stones belonged to an older race, remembered only in myth. The Americas provide further echoes. Early Spanish explorers recorded indigenous traditions of giants in South America. In North America, legends among the Paiute and other tribes describe red-haired giants who lived in caves and were eventually defeated. In Mexico, Aztec myths spoke of a previous age when giants called the Quinametzin built cities before being destroyed by the gods. Their memory was linked to the massive pyramids near Teotihuacan, which the later Aztec found already standing. The Pacific also contains these motifs. On Easter Island, the massive stone statues known as moai were explained in oral tradition as the work of powerful ancestors, some described in giant terms. In Polynesia, myths recall great beings who raised stones and shaped landscapes. Across scattered islands, the same theme recurs. The greatest works of stone are attributed to beings who were not quite human. The figure of the giant may be symbolic. Large stones and immense works naturally invite the idea of builders with greater strength. But the persistence of this theme across cultures suggests more than coincidence. Giants appear before the flood in Mesopotamia and the Bible, before the deluge in the Andes, and before the Olympian age in Greece. They are consistently linked to a world that ended in catastrophe. Archaeology does not confirm the existence of giant humans in the literal sense, though skeletons of unusual size are occasionally reported in folklore and 19th century newspapers. What archaeology does confirm is that many megalithic sites predate the cultures who later explained them. When people encountered ruins they could not account for, they turned to myth. Giants became the imagined ancestors of the stones. The question remains whether these myths preserve memory of earlier peoples who were not giants in stature, but giants in skill. Builders of a pre-flood civilization may have seemed larger than life to those who followed. Their works of stone, standing long after their disappearance, created the impression of superhuman strength. Giants, in this sense, may represent memory of lost knowledge, translated into mythic form. The flood connection is striking. Again and again, giants are said to have lived before the waters rose. In the Bible, they are wiped away in the deluge. In the Andes, they are drowned when Viracocha brings the flood. In Greece, the Titans are buried beneath the earth after their defeat, their memory preserved in myth. The consistent link between giants and catastrophe suggests that the myths are not isolated inventions, but shared echoes of a story older than written history. The stones themselves remain. Cyclopean walls in Greece, megalithic fortresses in Peru, vast statues in the Pacific, all attributed to giants by later peoples. Archaeology can explain some of these works through human effort, tools, and ingenuity. Yet the myths remain part of their history, shaping how people understood them for centuries. Giants continue to walk the memory of the earth, not as flesh and bone, but as figures of myth tied to the greatest stones of the past. The maps of forgotten lands. Long before satellites and aerial surveys, ancient navigators charted the seas with surprising accuracy. Some maps from the medieval and early modern periods contain details that seem beyond the knowledge of their time. They depict coastlines in ways that suggest either remarkable skill in navigation or the preservation of older, inherited knowledge. A few even appear to show regions that would have been visible only when sea levels were lower, linking them to the idea of a pre-flood civilization whose memory survived in maps. The most famous of these is the Piri Reis map, Drawn in 1513 by the Ottoman admiral Piri Reis, it shows the western coast of Africa, the eastern coast of South America, and the northern reaches of Antarctica. Only a fragment survives, discovered in 1,929 inches Istanbul's Topkapi Palace. Scholars were puzzled by its detail. The South American coastline, only partly explored by Europeans at that time, is depicted with surprising accuracy. More controversial is the portion that some identify as Antarctica's Queen Maud Land, shown free of ice. If this interpretation is correct, it suggests knowledge of the continent before it was covered by glaciers, a view last possible more than 6,000 years ago. Piri Reis himself explained the sources of his map. In notes written on the parchment, he claimed to have used older charts, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. He referred to maps captured from the Portuguese, as well as ancient maps, said to be based on knowledge from earlier ages. Whether these were classical or more mysterious in origin, his own admission suggests he was compiling from traditions much older than his own time. The Piri Reis map is not the only example. The Orontius Phineas map, drawn in 1531, also shows Antarctica, with rivers and mountains depicted beneath what is now ice. The detail matches modern surveys made with ground-penetrating radar. When first studied in the 1,960 seconds, researchers suggested that the map must have been based on older sources, preserved and copied over centuries. The Mercator maps, produced in the mid-1500s, also contain details of polar regions unknown to explorers until much later. Earlier still, the works of Claudius Ptolemy in the 2nd century CE preserved maps of the known world based on Greek and possibly earlier Egyptian sources. His Geographia, rediscovered in the Renaissance, contained coordinates for hundreds of locations. Some argue that errors in Ptolemy's maps may conceal fragments of coastlines that no longer exist, submerged after the floods at the end of the Ice Age. The idea that maps could preserve pre-flood knowledge is controversial. Mainstream scholars argue that similarities between ancient maps and modern coastlines can be explained by coincidence or misinterpretation. Yet the persistence of details beyond the knowledge of their time suggests another possibility, that navigators inherited charts far older than the civilizations that copied them. Legends of lost lands support this view. In the Atlantic, stories of Atlantis tell of an island that sank beneath the sea. In the Indian Ocean, Tamil traditions recall Kumari Kandam, a land lost to floods. In the Pacific, Polynesian navigators spoke of vanished islands remembered in chants. If coastlines now submerged were once inhabited, maps could have preserved their outlines. Sailors copying charts from older traditions may not have understood their origins, but they carried the shapes forward. The accuracy of ancient navigation also raises questions. Polynesian voyagers crossed vast distances using star charts, swell patterns, and oral maps encoded in memory. Norse sailors reached Greenland and North America, guided by sunstones and coastal lore. These traditions show how non-modern cultures could achieve remarkable feats of mapping without instruments. If such skills existed in earlier times, they may have been capable of recording coastlines later forgotten. One intriguing case is the so-called Boischet map of 1737. Based on earlier sources, it depicts Antarctica divided into two landmasses, corresponding to what modern science later revealed lies beneath the ice. Though later in date, it suggests that cartographers sometimes worked with older information, passed down through sources they did not fully understand. The link to the flood comes from the possibility that some maps depict coastlines as they existed when sea levels were lower. If Antarctica or submerged shelves are shown without ice or water, the charts may reflect knowledge from more than 10,000 years ago. This would place their origins in the period remembered in flood myths, when rising seas erased coastal lands. Maps, in this sense, become documents of memory preserving a view of the world that no longer exists. Skeptics argue that interpretations of these maps often rely on forced readings. The supposed outline of Antarctica may be misidentified, or the coastlines distorted by projection errors. Medieval maps often mixed myth with geography, including sea monsters and imaginary islands. Yet the consistency of certain details, rivers, mountains, proportions, suggests more than coincidence. Even if errors exist, fragments of truth may remain embedded within. The survival of maps over centuries is itself remarkable. Papyrus, parchment, and paper decay, yet copies can transmit information across millennia. The maps of Piri Reis, Orontius Phineus, and others may be late expressions of a chain of copying stretching back into antiquity. Each generation of cartographers added, corrected, or misread, but the core shapes endured. If that core came from a pre-flood civilization, then the maps we hold today are shadows of a forgotten knowledge. In myths, the theme of guidance after catastrophe often appears. Survivors are given knowledge to rebuild, whether through divine instruction or ancestral memory. Maps may have played this role. They guided not only sailors across seas, but also cultures through time, preserving memory of lands that once were. The maps of forgotten lands do not prove the existence of a lost civilization, but they provide tantalizing clues. They suggest that fragments of knowledge can survive destruction, carried across ages by scribes and sailors who did not fully understand what they held. They remind us that memory is not only in myth, but also in lines drawn on parchment, showing a world that has vanished beneath ice and sea. The language of symbols. Before alphabets and written histories, people carved images into stone, painted signs on walls, and inscribed marks onto bone and clay. These symbols, scattered across continents and separated by oceans, often share patterns that seem too consistent to be coincidence. Spirals, circles, animals, and abstract forms repeat in cultures with no known contact. To some, this suggests a shared symbolic language carried across the flood, a memory of communication from a time before written words. One of the most enduring motifs is the spiral. Found in megalithic tombs in Ireland, carved on stones at Newgrange more than 5,000 years ago, the spiral also appears in petroglyphs of the American Southwest, in Maori carvings of New Zealand, and in the rock art of Africa. The spiral may represent the sun, cycles of time, or water. Its meaning varies, but its persistence suggests a deep, shared concept. Archaeologists note that spirals are easily drawn and universal, yet their presence in ritual sites points to symbolic importance that transcended cultures. Another recurring symbol is the serpent. In Mesoamerica, the feathered serpent god Quetzalcoatl represented wisdom, fertility, and rebirth. In India, the Naga were powerful beings linked to water and protection. In Norse mythology, Jörmungandr, the world serpent, encircled the earth. Serpent carvings appear at Göbekli Tepe, one of the oldest ritual sites, dating to 9,600 BCE. The consistent appearance of serpents as symbols of power and transformation suggests they belonged to a symbolic vocabulary older than any single culture. Geometric forms also dominate early symbols. The swastika, long before its modern misuse, appears in Neolithic Europe, in the Indus Valley, among Native American tribes, and in ancient Greece. Always a symbol of movement, the sun, or life, it reflects a shared visual idea carried across continents. Crosses, circles, and grids also appear widely, often linked to cosmology. The cross within a circle, for example, is found in petroglyphs worldwide, possibly representing the four directions or the division of time. Undeciphered scripts may also hold fragments of this language. The Indus Valley script, used from around 2600 to 1900 BCE, remains unreadable. Its symbols include animals, abstract signs, and short inscriptions. Some researchers believe it may not be a full writing system, but a set of symbolic marks. Yet its consistency across thousands of artifacts suggests organized communication. Without translation, its meaning remains locked, perhaps preserving knowledge older than the Indus cities themselves. In Europe, the Vinci symbols, dating to around 5500 BCE, appear on pottery and figurines in the Balkans. They predate known writing systems by millennia. The symbols include crosses, spirals, and abstract marks, some similar to signs later seen in Sumerian cuneiform. Scholars debate whether they are early writing or decorative marks. If they were used systematically, they may represent a form of communication from a forgotten stage of history. Symbols also appear in architecture. At Göbekli Tepe, massive stone pillars bear carvings of animals, foxes, snakes, birds, and lions, arranged in patterns. Some pillars show abstract shapes, possibly representing constellations. Researchers studying the site argue that the carvings may encode astronomical events, making the pillars both art and record. If true, Göbekli Tepe preserves a symbolic system tied to the sky, dating back more than 11,000 years. The connection between symbols and astronomy is strong. In many cultures, symbols represent stars, planets, and cycles of time. The star cluster, known as the Pleiades, appears in myths from Greece, Japan, and the Americas. Carvings resembling the cluster are found in ancient sites. The 7 stars become 7 sisters, 7 animals, or 7 fires, but always the same group in the sky. Such shared recognition points to a symbolic system rooted in observation long before written history. Flood myths also connect to symbols. Water waves, zigzags, and arcs are carved into stones across the world. They may represent rivers or floods. In cultures where the deluge was remembered, symbols of water gain sacred meaning. Spirals may represent whirlpools or currents. Zigzags may represent waves. The language of symbols could thus preserve memory of the cataclysm, encoded in forms that survived when words were forgotten. The survival of symbols across continents raises the question of transmission. Did different cultures invent the same symbols independently, or did they inherit them from a shared source? Archaeologists often argue for independent invention, noting that spirals, crosses, and snakes are universal forms. Yet the clustering of these symbols at sacred and monumental sites suggests deliberate transmission. If survivors of the flood carried symbolic traditions into new lands, the similarities would be explained. Myths reinforce this possibility. In Polynesia, navigation was guided by star maps remembered in chants. In Mesopotamia, sacred numbers and symbols were taught by the gods. In Egypt, hieroglyphs were said to be a gift of Thoth. These traditions describe knowledge passed down from earlier times. Symbols, as the simplest form of writing, may have been part of this inheritance. The persistence of undeciphered scripts adds to the mystery. The Rongorongo glyphs of Easter Island, the Linear A of Crete, and the Indus signs remain untranslated. They may hold memories of older traditions, preserved through symbols no longer understood. Each undeciphered script represents a lost language, yet also the survival of knowledge across collapse. The idea of a pre-flood symbolic language is not universally accepted. Critics argue that similarities between symbols are coincidence, that simple shapes will always reappear. But the placement of these symbols in tombs, temples, and sacred sites suggests they carried weight beyond decoration. The global distribution of similar symbols hints at shared roots, whether through direct transmission or deep memory. The language of symbols may never be fully deciphered, yet in spirals carved into ancient stones, in serpents winding through myths, in undeciphered marks pressed into clay, fragments of a shared vocabulary endure. They link cultures divided by time and distance, pointing to a world where communication was not yet words, but images. If a pre-flood civilization existed, its language may have been one of symbols, carried across waters and remembered in stone. Long after spoken tongues vanished, symbols could survive, etched into monuments and pottery. They remain today as traces of a forgotten system, half understood, still speaking quietly across the ages, the builders of the deep past. In many cultures, the knowledge of building, farming, and writing is not described as an invention of humanity alone. Instead, traditions tell of figures who arrived after catastrophe, bringing skills to restore order. They are remembered as gods, demigods, or culture bearers, often linked to the sea and to the flood. These builders of the deep past appear across the world, suggesting a shared memory of instructors who guided the survivors of an earlier age. In Mesopotamia, the story of Oannes is preserved by Berossus, a Babylonian priest writing in the 3rd century BCE. He described Oannes as a being who emerged from the Persian Gulf. Half man and half fish, he taught humanity, agriculture, architecture, and law. By day he instructed people, while at night he returned to the sea. Oannes was said to have brought writing and knowledge of the stars, establishing civilization after the flood. Later traditions mention other fishmen known as the Apkallu, who carried wisdom to humanity. In Egypt, Thoth was revered as the god of writing, mathematics, and architecture. He was credited with giving hieroglyphs to the Egyptians, measuring time, and teaching geometry. Myths describe him as a mediator, restoring balance after chaos. Some texts suggest that Thoth recorded knowledge from earlier ages, preserving it through cycles of destruction. Later, Greek writers identified him with Hermes, calling him Hermes Trismegistus, a figure said to have written books of hidden wisdom. The idea of Thoth as a preserver of pre-flood knowledge persisted in Egyptian tradition. The Andes hold similar stories. Viracocha, a creator god, was said to have fashioned giants and then destroyed them in a flood. Afterward, he created new people and traveled among them disguised as a man. He taught them agriculture, stonework, and order before departing across the sea. Spanish chroniclers recorded that the Inca attributed the great stone walls of Cusco and other sites to Viracocha's guidance. He was remembered not as a local figure, but as a wandering instructor arriving after catastrophe to rebuild. In Greece, Prometheus plays a comparable role. Though remembered for stealing fire from the gods to give to humanity, he was also credited with teaching skills, the use of numbers, the knowledge of writing, the harnessing of animals, and the construction of ships. His punishment for defying Zeus reflects the danger of transmitting knowledge forbidden to ordinary humans. Prometheus represents the idea that civilization was a gift or a theft from beings beyond humanity. Other traditions echo the same theme. In Polynesia, Maui was remembered as a culture hero who fished up islands, taught navigation, and gave fire to people. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was said to have taught the Toltecs arts, agriculture, and governance. In India, the sages or rishis were described as receiving divine knowledge after the flood of Manu. Each culture recalls figures who appear suddenly, bringing skills too advanced to emerge from nothing. Archaeology shows that many early societies developed rapidly. Writing appeared in Sumer around 3200 BCE, in Egypt shortly after, and in the Indus Valley by 2600 BCE. Architecture in stone, irrigation systems, and planned cities all appeared within a few millennia of the Ice Age floods. The suddenness of these achievements has led some to suggest they were not entirely new, but the continuation of earlier traditions preserved by culture bearers. The myths consistently link these figures to the sea. Oannes emerged from the water, Viracocha departed across the ocean, and flood survivors were guided by divine beings arriving from beyond. The connection between knowledge and water suggests memory of displaced coastal peoples carrying traditions inland. Survivors of drowned lands may have appeared as strangers, bringing skills unfamiliar to local groups. Over time, their memory became mythologized as gods or demigods. Inscriptions and texts sometimes preserve this link. The Sumerian king list describes kingship descending from heaven both before and after the flood. The Egyptian Turin Papyrus lists rulers before the dynasties, some identified as gods. In both cases, the idea is that knowledge was not invented anew, but restored after destruction. These documents imply that the first cities inherited traditions from an earlier world. Monuments also reflect the theme of teaching. At Göbekli Tepe, carvings of animals and symbols appear alongside massive stone pillars, built by societies not yet practicing farming. The site suggests outside instruction, or at least knowledge carried from elsewhere. In Egypt, the sudden appearance of pyramid building without clear prototypes raises similar questions. In the Andes, the precision of megalithic walls suggests techniques known to earlier builders. Each case reflects the possibility of knowledge transmitted by instructors remembered as divine. Critics argue that myths of culture bearers are symbolic. Gods are said to teach because people wish to explain the origin of skills. Fire, farming, and writing are described as gifts to emphasize their importance. The figures may not represent real beings, but the personification of discovery. Yet the global repetition of this theme, always linked to flood and survival, suggests more than coincidence. If a pre-flood civilization existed, its legacy may have been carried not only in monuments, but also in people who survived. They may have appeared as strangers in new lands, bringing with them agriculture, astronomy, and architecture. To local communities, their knowledge would have seemed divine. Over generations, they became remembered as Oannes, Thoth, Viracocha, and Prometheus. The builders of the deep past are remembered in myth, not in archaeology. Their names differ across cultures, yet their role is the same: to restore knowledge after catastrophe. They link the world before the flood to the world after it, serving as bridges of memory. Whether they were real individuals, symbolic figures, or distorted memories, they represent the survival of tradition across one of the greatest upheavals in human history. The forgotten machines. Among the ruins of ancient civilizations, there are accounts of techniques and tools that seem to defy the limitations of stone hammers and copper chisels. Legends tell of machines that moved massive blocks, of forces that cut granite with ease, and of vehicles that traveled through the air. While archaeology finds little direct evidence of advanced technology, myths and records from multiple cultures preserve tantalizing descriptions. These may represent memories of lost methods, fragments of knowledge from an earlier time, perhaps even from before the flood. In Egypt, later Greek writers reported stories of stones being raised for the pyramids, not by brute force alone, but through the use of secret devices. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, described machines that lifted blocks step by step. Other accounts speak of priests using fire to move massive stones, suggesting energy or heat as a force. Though no physical remains of such machines have been discovered, the sheer scale of construction at Giza has fueled speculation. The largest blocks, weighing more than 70 tons, were placed with precision. How they were moved from quarries and set into place remains unanswered. In South America, the ruins of Pumapunku in Bolivia include blocks of andesite shaped with sharp angles and drilled holes. Some appear to have been cut with tools resembling saws or drills, yet copper and stone implements would struggle to achieve such precision. Legends among the Aymara people recall that the stones were moved by sound or by a divine force. Oral traditions describe priests using trumpets or chants to lift stones into place. While such accounts cannot be verified, they suggest memory of methods beyond ordinary labor. The Mahabharata of India, an epic composed thousands of years ago, describes weapons and vehicles that sound like machines. References to Vimana's flying chariots used by gods and heroes appear throughout the text. They are described as capable of moving in all directions, of producing fire and sound, and of traveling vast distances. Some passages describe battles with weapons that produce heat, light, and devastation. To many scholars, these are mythic images of storms or fire. To others, they may represent memories of machines from an earlier age, preserved in poetic form. In Mesopotamia, texts speak of the Mi, divine decrees or powers that included the skills of craftsmanship, writing, and building. Some interpretations suggest these were not just laws, but objects or devices that enabled civilization. The Apkallu, fish-like sages who survived the flood, were said to have brought these powers back to humanity. Whether symbolic or real, the idea suggests that knowledge was preserved through tools or machines carried across the waters. Legends of levitation also appear in Buddhist and Tibetan traditions. Monks were said to use sound, gongs, and chants to lift stones into the air during construction of monasteries. A 20th century account by a Swedish physician, though anecdotal, describes seeing large stones move through coordinated sound. While unverified, such stories echo the theme of forgotten methods for overcoming gravity, a theme repeated across continents. The ancient Greeks spoke of automatons, self-moving devices created by Hephaestus, the god of smiths. Myths describe mechanical servants, golden tripods that moved on their own, and a bronze giant named Talos who guarded Crete. Though mythological, these accounts reflect an awareness of machines that could act independently. In the Hellenistic period, inventors such as Hero of Alexandria created mechanical devices powered by steam and water. These later machines suggest that ancient cultures explored technology far earlier than often assumed. Even in the Bible, references appear to lost knowledge. The Book of Enoch, excluded from most canons, describes angels teaching humanity the use of metals, cosmetics, and weapons before the flood. These teachings are portrayed as corrupting, leading to destruction. The theme again is of knowledge mechanical, chemical, or technological possessed in an earlier age and then lost. Archaeology sometimes finds anomalies that fuel speculation. Drill cores in granite at Giza, noted in the 19th century by engineer Flinders Petrie, show spiral grooves that resemble work done by mechanical drills. The Baghdad Battery, a small jar with copper and iron components, has been suggested as a primitive galvanic cell. Though debated, such artifacts show that ancient peoples experimented with techniques we associate with later times. Skeptics argue that all these accounts can be explained symbolically. Vimanas may represent clouds or storms. Fire that moves stones may describe torches guiding workers. Legends of levitation may symbolize spiritual power. Archaeology emphasizes that large blocks can be moved with sledges, ramps, and manpower. Yet the persistence of machine-like imagery across unrelated cultures raises questions. Why do so many myths describe forces, vehicles, and devices that echo technology? If a pre-flood civilization existed, its tools may have been lost in the catastrophe. Survivors may have preserved memories of methods they could not reproduce, passing them down as myths. Later generations, unable to recreate the machines, explain them as the work of gods or magic. The forgotten machines thus became woven into legend, half remembered but never fully explained. The flood myths themselves reinforce this. Again and again, knowledge is described as being misused before the flood, leading to destruction. The gods, angry at humanity, send the waters. The implication is that technology was part of the world erased. Afterward, fragments remained stories of flying vehicles, tools that cut stone, and machines that moved blocks without effort. Today, researchers study these accounts with caution. Most archaeologists see them as myth, not evidence of lost machines. Yet the mystery of sites like Puma Punku, the precision of megaliths, and the unexplained details of texts like the Mahabharata keep the question alive. Were these simply myths of imagination or memories of forgotten technology? The forgotten machines, whether real or symbolic, remind us of how much knowledge can be lost. Civilizations rise and fall, and their tools may vanish with them. Only stories remain, describing wonders that seem impossible to later ages. In the ruins of stone and the lines of ancient texts, faint traces of these machines endure, pointing back to a world before the flood, when humanity or something greater built, with methods now unknown. The submerged temples. Beneath the waters of the world's oceans lie ruins that resemble temples. Some are carved from stone, others appear as arranged blocks, and many rest at depths that suggest they were built when sea levels were lower. These submerged structures invite questions about their builders and the time in which they were raised. Were they sanctuaries of known civilizations now lost to the tides, or are they remnants of an age before the flood myths, carried down into memory only through legend? Off the coast of India, near Mahabalipuram, divers have reported the remains of stone walls and foundations beneath the Bay of Bengal. Local legend speaks of the 7 pagodas, magnificent temples said to have lined the shore in ancient times. Today, only one stands above water, the Shore Temple, built in the 7th century CE. But accounts from fishermen and explorers describe 6 more swallowed by the sea. In 2002, a team from the National Institute of Oceanography confirmed the presence of submerged structures offshore. Stone blocks, steps, and walls were mapped, lying 5 to 10 meters below the surface. Though their age remains debated, some suggest they predate the known temples, pointing to a tradition far older than the Pallava dynasty. Another striking site lies in the Gulf of Khamhat on India's western coast. In 2001, sonar surveys revealed geometric patterns on the seabed, including what appeared to be walls, platforms, and a grid-like arrangement. Divers retrieved artifacts, including pottery shards and carbon material, some dated to as early as 7,500 BCE. If confirmed, this would place the structures thousands of years before the Indus Valley civilization. Critics argue that natural formations may explain the shapes, but the scale and regularity of the site suggests deliberate construction. The Gulf of Khumbat remains one of the most intriguing submerged archaeological locations in the world. Farther east, in Japan, lies the underwater complex of Yonaguni. Discovered in 1986, it consists of massive terraces, steps, and platforms carved into sandstone. Some surfaces are smooth, with right angles and sharp edges resembling walls and stairs. Others appear to form roads and plazas. At depths of up to 25 meters, the structures would have been above sea level more than 10,000 years ago. Geologists debate whether the formations are natural, caused by fracturing of sandstone, or artificial. Supporters of the artificial theory point to features resembling staircases, carved faces, and symbols. The possibility that Yonaguni was once a ceremonial complex places it among the most controversial submerged sites. The Mediterranean also preserves hints of sunken temples. Off the coast of Alexandria in Egypt, divers have located ruins identified as the ancient city of Heracleion. Columns, statues, and foundations lie scattered on the seabed. The city, once a major port, sank into the sea around the 2nd century BCE, possibly due to earthquakes and liquefaction of soil. Though historically documented, Heracleion illustrates how sacred centers could vanish beneath water, leaving only ruins. Near Malta, divers have found submerged stone structures resembling temples at depths of around 20 meters. Malta itself is home to megalithic temples dated to 3500 BCE, among the oldest in Europe. The underwater formations may represent earlier phases of construction, built when the land extended farther into the sea. If so, they could link Malta's monumental tradition to an even older age, one closer to the end of the Ice Age. In the Caribbean, legends surround the so-called Bimini Road, a line of rectangular stones discovered in 1968 off the Bahamas. The formation resembles a paved causeway stretching for hundreds of meters. Some argue it is natural beach rock, fractured by currents. Others claim it is the remnant of a temple platform or harbour. The discovery coincided with predictions of submerged ruins in the Atlantic, fueling associations with Atlantis. Whether natural or artificial, the Bimini Road remains a central piece in discussions of submerged ceremonial structures. Temples have also been reported off the coast of Yonaguni's neighbouring islands, including Okinawa. Stone pillars and pavements appear at shallow depths, forming patterns that resemble courtyards and stairways. Together with Yonaguni, they suggest a wider submerged landscape, possibly connected by cultural traditions long before recorded history. Flood myths consistently link temples and sacred spaces with catastrophe. In India, the god Vishnu is said to have warned Manu of the deluge, guiding him to preserve life and ritual. In Mesopotamia, temples are destroyed by the flood, only to be rebuilt after the waters recede. In Polynesia, gods carried sacred stones to new islands after the sea swallowed older lands. These myths suggest that temples were not only lost to the flood, but also central to memory of survival. The placement of many submerged sites near river mouths and coastal plains supports this. Temples often stood at boundaries between land and sea, places of transition. When sea levels rose, these sanctuaries were among the first to vanish. Today, their ruins beneath the water testify to changing shorelines and to the vulnerability of sacred places. Archaeologists approach submerged temples cautiously. Some sites are clearly natural formations misinterpreted as architecture. Others are historical, like Heracleion, lost within known centuries. But a few remain unexplained, resting at depths that suggest great antiquity. These demand consideration of the possibility that organized building traditions existed long before mainstream timelines allow. If true, the submerged temples point to civilizations thriving along coasts more than 10,000 years ago, erased by rising seas. Survivors may have carried memory inland, rebuilding shrines and sanctuaries in new lands. The continuity of temple design, rectangular platforms, stairways, pillars across cultures may reflect inheritance from those submerged prototypes. The temples beneath the sea may never yield definitive answers, Excavation underwater is difficult, and dating submerged stone is nearly impossible without associated artifacts. Yet, their presence keeps alive the possibility of an older chapter in human history, one in which sacred spaces were already central before the flood. The submerged temples remain silent beneath waves, their stones eroded by currents and hidden by sand. Yet they speak through legend, through myth, and through the persistence of ritual traditions that continue on land. They remind us that beneath the sea lies not only natural geography, but also the ruins of human devotion, waiting in darkness since the waters rose. The echoes of Atlantis. Few stories of the ancient world have endured with such persistence as the tale of Atlantis. First recorded by the Greek philosopher Plato in the 4th century BCE, it describes a powerful island civilization that flourished thousands of years earlier before being destroyed in a single day and night of catastrophe. Atlantis has since become a symbol of lost worlds, inspiring speculation, exploration, and legend. Beneath the myth lies a question. Did Plato invent the story as allegory, or was he preserving memory of a real land erased by the sea? Plato recounts the tale in 2 dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias. He attributes his knowledge to Solon, the Athenian lawgiver, who heard the story from priests in Egypt during his travels centuries earlier. The priests spoke of an island beyond the Pillars of Heracles, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, larger than Libya and Asia Minor combined. From this island, a powerful people launched expeditions that threatened the Mediterranean. Only Athens resisted them. Then, according to the priests, Atlantis was struck by floods and earthquakes, sinking beneath the ocean. Plato gave details of Atlantis' society. Its kings ruled 10 regions, each descended from Poseidon and a mortal woman. The city contained concentric rings of land and water, with palaces, temples, and harbours. Its people were skilled in navigation, engineering, and war. They possessed wealth from mines and agriculture, and they built with stone in monumental fashion. Yet their pride led to corruption, and the gods punished them with destruction. For Plato, the story served a purpose. He used Atlantis as an example of hubris and the downfall of empires. Yet he insisted that the tale was true, passed down faithfully from Egyptian sources. His dialogues were never completed, leaving gaps in the account. Later writers such as Plutarch and Proclus accepted Atlantis as history, while others treated it as parable. The debate has continued ever since. In the centuries after Plato, attempts were made to locate Atlantis. Some identified it with islands in the Atlantic, such as the Azores or Madeira. Others placed it in the Mediterranean, suggesting Crete and the Minoan civilization, which suffered destruction around 1600 BCE from the eruption of Thera. The eruption produced tsunamis and ash clouds, devastating coastal cities. The Minoans were advanced sailors, builders, and traders. Their sudden decline fits many details of Plato's story, though the scale of Atlantis is greater than Crete. Other theories place Atlantis in the Caribbean, linking it to submerged structures near Bimini or Cuba. Some point to the Gulf of Cambat in India, where ruins lie beneath the sea. Others look to Antarctica, suggesting that shifting ice could conceal remains of a lost land. These interpretations vary, but all share the idea that Plato's account preserves memory of a real catastrophe. Flood myths support this possibility. The destruction of Atlantis mirrors the global pattern of deluge stories. Like Utnapishtim in Mesopotamia, Noah in the Hebrew Bible, and Manu in India, Atlantis reflects the theme of a world undone by water. The date Plato assigns to Atlantis, about 9,000 years before Solon's time, corresponds roughly to the end of the Ice Age, when sea levels rose and coastlines were submerged. This coincidence has fueled speculation that Atlantis represents memory of those floods. Archaeological evidence of submerged sites adds to the mystery. Yonaguni, the Gulf of Cambat, and other underwater ruins suggest that advanced building traditions existed before the seas rose. If Atlantis were one of these coastal civilizations, its destruction would have been preserved in story. Survivors may have carried memory inland, where it became legend told to Solon and then recorded by Plato. Egyptian sources also connect. The priests who spoke to Solon may have been recalling their own records of floods and lost lands. Egypt itself preserved flood myths and king lists extending back before known dynasties. If records of vanished islands once existed in Egyptian archives, they could have provided the basis for Plato's account. Skeptics argue that Plato invented Atlantis entirely as allegory. They point out that no earlier Greek text mentions it, and that its description fits his philosophical themes of ideal states and moral decline. The concentric rings of the city may represent balance and order, not geography. The numbers he gives, 9,000 years, vast dimensions, may be exaggerations for effect. Yet, even if symbolic, Plato's story may still preserve fragments of older traditions he heard indirectly. The persistence of Atlantis in cultural memory is notable. Unlike other Greek myths, it has remained central for more than 2,000 years. Explorers, from Renaissance sailors to modern divers, have searched for it. Writers have adapted it into allegories, utopias, and cautionary tales. Scientists have tested theories linking it to geological events, such as the flooding of the Black Sea or the collapse of Atlantic islands. The fact that the story remains alive suggests it touches something deeper than mere fiction. Some researchers see Atlantis not as a single place, but as a composite of multiple memories. The eruption of Thera, the flooding of coastal plains after the Ice Age, and the destruction of maritime cultures. Plato may have woven these elements into one narrative. In this sense, Atlantis is less a literal island and more a symbol of the lost pre-flood world, remembered in fragments across cultures. The echoes of Atlantis continue today, in the ruins beneath seas, in the flood myths of distant peoples, and in the unexplained leaps of early civilizations. The possibility of a lost world remains. Whether Plato recorded fact, allegory, or a mixture, his story preserves the memory of catastrophe and the allure of what lies beyond the known. Atlantis endures not only as a place but as an idea, that before the flood there was a civilization advanced and powerful, and that its destruction left behind only traces in stone, myth, and memory. The hidden records. Across cultures, there are traditions of records preserved from a time before disaster. Some speak of great libraries, others of secret chambers hidden beneath temples or monuments. The belief is that knowledge of earlier ages was not entirely lost in the flood, but hidden away, waiting to be rediscovered. Whether symbolic or literal, these stories suggest that fragments of the pre-flood world may still lie concealed in archives, scrolls, and stone chambers scattered across the earth. One of the most famous examples is the Library of Alexandria. Founded in the 3rd century BCE in Egypt, it was said to contain hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Accounts describe texts gathered from across the ancient world, including works from Greece, Mesopotamia, India, and beyond. Ships docking at Alexandria were required to surrender any scrolls they carried so that copies could be made. Though much of the library's history is uncertain, later writers claimed it preserved knowledge far older than its own founding. Some said that texts from earlier Egyptian dynasties, themselves inheritors of pre-flood wisdom, were stored there. The destruction of the library, whether by fire, neglect, or repeated damage, has become a symbol of knowledge lost forever. Egyptian tradition also speaks of hidden archives. The so-called Hall of Records is a legendary chamber said to lie beneath the Great Sphinx of Giza. According to stories, it contains documents, scrolls, or tablets recording the wisdom of a forgotten civilization, possibly from before the flood. Ancient texts describe the god of writing as having hidden his knowledge in secret chambers. Some researchers believe this inspired the legend of the Hall of Records. Though excavations around the Sphinx have revealed tunnels and anomalies, no definitive discovery has been made. The belief persists that beneath the sands of Giza lies an archive from an earlier world. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerians recorded their king lists, dividing history into rulers before and after the flood. These lists suggest continuity of memory, preserved in clay tablets stored in temple archives. Thousands of such tablets survive today, describing astronomy, mathematics, and law. Yet even these may be fragments of larger archives now lost. Babylon and Nineveh were centers of vast libraries, many of which perished when the cities were destroyed. Ashurbanipal's library at Nineveh discovered in the 19th century, preserved thousands of texts, including the Epic of Gilgamesh and flood narratives. Some believe that earlier, even older records once existed, but were destroyed in repeated wars. The Maya also preserved traditions of hidden records. Spanish accounts from the 16th century describe how friars destroyed large numbers of Maya codices, burning them as idolatry. Only 4 confirmed codices survive, written on bark paper, with glyphs describing astronomy, ritual, and history. Yet Maya tradition speaks of knowledge hidden in caves and sealed in stone containers. The belief is that records of earlier ages remain concealed, surviving the destruction. Some legends connect these to cycles of time, with each world age recorded and preserved for the next. India offers similar accounts. Texts known as the Vedas, preserved orally for centuries before being written down, are said to be a survival of knowledge from earlier ages. Some traditions claim that hidden texts, called agamas, are sealed in temples or mountains, awaiting rediscovery when the time is right. The continuity of oral preservation in India is remarkable, suggesting that at least fragments of knowledge may have survived unbroken for thousands of years, even across floods and upheavals. Greece too preserved myths of hidden wisdom. The philosopher Plato wrote not only of Atlantis, but also of ancient knowledge passed down through Egyptian priests. Pythagoras, according to later accounts, traveled to Egypt and Babylon to study with priests and magi, learning geometry, mathematics, and cosmology, said to be remnants of earlier ages. Greek writers often described their wisdom as inherited, not invented, pointing to older records preserved by other cultures. In medieval Europe, legends arose of secret books containing knowledge from before the flood. The Book of Enoch, preserved only in fragments, describes angels teaching humanity metallurgy, writing, and astronomy. It was excluded from most canons, surviving only in Ethiopian tradition. The idea that forbidden knowledge was hidden or suppressed reflects the same theme found in other cultures. That wisdom of earlier times was preserved, yet not always accessible. Archaeology occasionally uncovers fragments that support these traditions. In 1945, the Nag Hammadi Library in Egypt was discovered, containing Gnostic texts buried in jars for over 1,500 years. In 1947, the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in caves near Qumran, preserving manuscripts that had survived hidden for centuries. These finds suggest that hiding records in caves, temples, or sealed containers was a real practice. If done in historical times, it may also have been done in prehistory. Flood myths reinforce the theme. Survivors are often described as carrying not only animals and seeds, but also knowledge. In Mesopotamia, Utnapishtim is instructed to preserve the arts of civilization. In India, Manu is guided to rebuild order after the waters. In each case, knowledge is preserved across destruction. Hidden records may be the symbolic counterpart of this, the idea that written or sacred wisdom was concealed until humanity was ready to use it again. Skeptics point out that many of these hidden records have never been found. The Hall of Records beneath the Sphinx remains legend. The 7 pagodas of Mahabalipuram are only partly verified, and most Atlantis-related archives are speculative. Yet the persistence of these traditions across cultures suggests a shared belief in the concealment of knowledge. Whether literal or symbolic, they reveal how societies viewed wisdom as something fragile, easily destroyed, yet also capable of being hidden for future generations. If a pre-flood civilization existed, its records may not survive in libraries like Alexandria, vulnerable to fire and war. Instead, they may lie sealed in caves, beneath temples, or on the seabed beyond easy reach. Oral traditions may carry echoes, but written or inscribed records would be the clearest proof. The hidden records, whether real or imagined, represent humanity's hope that the knowledge of the past is not entirely lost. The idea of hidden records continues to influence archaeology and legend. Explorers search beneath pyramids, divers seek submerged archives, and seekers imagine libraries waiting to be revealed. Whether or not they exist, the stories of these hidden records keep alive the possibility of continuity between the world before the flood and the civilizations that followed. The catastrophe in the sky. When flood myths are read carefully, water is not the only destructive force described. Many accounts also speak of fire from the heavens, of stars falling, and of great darkness following light. These details suggest that catastrophe may not have come solely from rising seas, but also from events in the sky: comets, meteor storms, or cosmic debris striking the Earth at the end of the Ice Age. Archaeology and geology have uncovered evidence that supports this possibility, linking myth to real events in the distant past. Around 12,800 years ago, a sudden cooling known as the Younger Dryas began. For more than 1,000 years, global temperatures dropped sharply, reversing the warming trend that had followed the Ice Age. Ice sheets advanced once more, and large mammals such as mammoths, mastodons, and giant ground sloths disappeared. For decades, the cause of the Younger Dryas puzzled scientists. Then, in 2007, researchers proposed that fragments of a comet may have struck North America, igniting wildfires and releasing debris into the atmosphere. Evidence supporting this theory includes layers of sediment containing microscopic diamonds, magnetic spherules, and carbon-rich material consistent with cosmic impact. These layers appear across sites in North America, Europe, and the Middle East, all dating to the onset of the Younger Dryas. At some locations, charred remains of plants and animals suggest massive fires swept the land. Such evidence points to a sudden and global event, consistent with stories of fire from the sky. In North America, indigenous traditions recall the destruction of earlier peoples by a great fire. The Ojibwe speak of a blazing star that fell and destroyed forests. The Pawnee describe fire serpents crossing the sky. These myths may be cultural memories of events tied to the Younger Dryas impact. In South America, similar traditions recall the heavens burning, followed by floods that reshaped the land. In Mesopotamia, the flood story of Utnapishtim includes not only rising waters, but also violent storms and fire. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes lightning and fire raining down as the deluge began. In the Bible, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is linked to fire and brimstone from the sky, though later in time, such accounts echo the same theme: catastrophe descending from above. In India, texts such as the Mahabharata speak of celestial weapons releasing heat and light like suns. Some passages describe fire-consuming forests and rivers boiling. While usually interpreted as mythic imagery, these descriptions resemble natural disasters caused by impacts or volcanic eruptions. Combined with flood traditions, they suggest that catastrophe was multifaceted, involving both water and fire. Archaeological sites reveal sudden destruction consistent with such events. At Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, construction began around the same time as the Younger Dryas. Some researchers propose that the site was built partly in response to cosmic disaster, perhaps as a sanctuary or a record. Carvings on its pillars include images of animals, constellations, and symbols interpreted by some as records of a comet strike. One pillar, known as the Vulture Stone, shows a figure holding a circular object and animals associated with the sky. Some believe it encodes an astronomical date close to 10,950 BCE, coinciding with the Younger Dryas event. The Clovis culture in North America also disappeared at the same time. Known for their distinctive stone tools, the Clovis vanished from the record, just as megafauna died off and fire layers appeared. Whether caused by climate change, overhunting, or cosmic impact, the coincidence suggests a sudden disruption. The idea that a comet or meteor played a role remains debated but cannot be dismissed. Globally, legends preserve fragments of this memory. The Hopi recall fiery serpents crossing the sky before floods came. Norse mythology describes Ragnarok, in which the sun darkens, stars fall, and fire consumes the earth before it sinks into the sea. In Mesoamerica, Aztec traditions tell of suns destroyed in earlier ages, one by fire, another by flood. The pairing of fire and water appears again and again, reflecting catastrophe on multiple levels. Geological evidence of massive floods also connects to impact events. In North America, the Missoula floods released vast torrents of water, when ice dams burst, carving deep canyons. In Europe, meltwater pulses reshaped river valleys. Such sudden floods could have been triggered or worsened by impacts melting ice sheets. Rising seas and chaotic weather followed, creating the global conditions remembered in myth. Skeptics argue that comet impact theories remain unproven. Alternative explanations for the Younger Dryas include meltwater disrupting ocean currents or volcanic eruptions injecting ash into the atmosphere. While these theories explain cooling, they do not account as neatly for the widespread fire layers and unusual sediments. Debate continues, but the convergence of myth, geology, and archaeology suggests that something extraordinary occurred in the sky at the end of the Ice Age. If fragments of a comet struck the Earth, the survivors would have remembered not only water, but fire. They would have seen the heavens blaze, forests burn, and animals vanish. Oral traditions carried these memories forward for millennia, embedding them in myths of punishment from the gods or weapons of the heaven. Plato's description of Atlantis destroyed by earthquakes and floods may also echo an event of cosmic origin. The catastrophe in the sky may not have been a single moment, but a series of events. Comet showers, meteor storms, and secondary disasters could have unfolded over centuries. To those who lived through them, they marked the end of one world and the beginning of another. The flood myths, combined with tales of fire from above, may represent humanity's attempt to preserve memory of a cosmic disaster that reshaped history. The sky has always been a source of wonder and fear. Ancient people watched the stars for guidance, but they also feared their power. When catastrophe came, they looked upward, remembering fire, light, and darkness. The catastrophe in the sky, whether caused by comet, meteor, or other forces, remains part of our deepest memory, linking myth and science in the story of the world before and after the flood. The legacy of the lost world. When the myths of the flood, the ruins of impossible stonework, and the traces of submerged temples are placed side by side, they suggest that the end of the Ice Age was not merely a climatic event, but a turning point for human memory. Something was lost, and something survived. The fragments of that earlier age appear in monuments, in symbols, and in traditions preserved by later civilizations. Together they form the legacy of a world that may have existed before the flood, carried into the present in ways that remain partial and elusive. Flood myths provide the first layer of this legacy. Across continents, they describe waters that erased whole lands and left only survivors. These myths are not identical, yet they share motifs: warnings from divine beings, the building of vessels, the preservation of seeds and animals, and the renewal of life after destruction. The consistency across Mesopotamia, India, the Americas, and Polynesia suggests that they record cultural memories of rising seas and catastrophic floods at the end of the Ice Age. This legacy is not only destruction, but also survival, the idea that life, order, and knowledge can be preserved through chaos. Monuments provide the second layer. At Baalbek, blocks of stone weighing more than 1,000 tons lie in terraces whose purpose and method of construction are unclear. At Sacsayhuaman, interlocking walls resist explanation with simple tools. At Pumapunku, andesite blocks shaped with precision suggest lost techniques. At Göbekli Tepe, pillars carved with animals reveal organized ritual more than 11,000 years ago. These works are the physical legacy of builders who left no written names. They demonstrate that people of deep antiquity possessed skills and organization far beyond what traditional timelines suggest. Symbols carry the third layer. Spirals, serpents, swastikas, and crosses appear in rock art, pottery, and undeciphered scripts across continents. The language of symbols transcends culture and time, suggesting either independent invention or shared inheritance. The persistence of these forms, especially in sacred contexts, implies that they were more than decoration. They may represent fragments of a symbolic system carried through the flood, a visual vocabulary older than writing. This legacy endures in rituals, carvings, and scripts that remain undeciphered. Records, though often hidden or destroyed, form another part of the legacy. The Library of Alexandria, the Hall of Records beneath the Sphinx, and the lost codices of the Maya are remembered as repositories of forgotten wisdom. Whether real or symbolic, these accounts suggest that cultures believed knowledge could be preserved deliberately, concealed until the time was right. The survival of texts like the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Vedas, and the Popol Vuh shows that even after destruction, fragments of earlier stories endure. These records form a bridge between memory and myth, preserving echoes of what came before. Geology and astronomy add a further dimension. The Younger Dryas event, with its sudden cooling and extinctions, leaves evidence of fire, impact debris, and floods. These scientific traces align with stories of catastrophe in the sky and deluge on Earth. They show that humanity lived through a period of upheaval, consistent with mythic accounts. The legacy here is material, written in sediments, ice cores, and fossil records. Science and myth, though using different languages, describe the same turning point in human history. The culture bearers, remembered in myth, represent another aspect of the legacy. Oannes in Mesopotamia, Thoth in Egypt, Viracocha in the Andes, and Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica are figures who appear after catastrophe, teaching writing, farming, and building. They may be symbolic, or they may represent survivors of displaced peoples who carried knowledge to new lands. Their stories suggest that fragments of the lost world were not only physical, but human, embodied in teachers remembered as gods or demigods. Maps also preserve part of the legacy. The Piri race chart of 1513, the Orontius Phineus map of 1531, and others contain details of coastlines unknown to their time. Whether misinterpretation or inheritance, they suggest that fragments of older cartography survived, copied across centuries. If any reflect coastlines as they appeared before sea levels rose, they are echoes of a pre-flood geography, drawn in ink centuries after the events that erased the lands themselves. The legacy of the lost world is therefore not singular, but layered. Myths, monuments, symbols, records, geology, maps, and memory of instructors. Each layer is partial, incomplete, and debated. Yet together, they point to continuity between a forgotten past and the civilizations that followed. Humanity may not have begun entirely anew after the flood, but carried fragments forward, weaving them into new cultures that bore faint traces of an older age. Skeptics argue that these fragments can be explained without invoking a lost civilization. Myths may reflect universal fears, monuments may reflect gradual skill, and symbols may reflect common shapes. Yet the convergence of so many elements, the global flood stories, the unexplained stonework, the sudden appearance of writing and astronomy, suggests more than coincidence. The legacy of the lost world may be real, though dispersed, disguised, and difficult to reconstruct. What remains certain is that the memory of catastrophe shaped human culture. Survivors rebuilt, carried traditions, and told stories of destruction and renewal. They raised monuments that echoed earlier works, carved symbols that remembered older systems, and preserved fragments of knowledge in ritual and record. This is the true legacy of the lost world, not a single ruin or artifact, but the persistence of memory across millennia. The legacy endures in the myths we tell, the ruins we preserve, and the questions we still ask. It is written in stone, in symbol, and in sky. Though much has been erased, enough remains to suggest that before the flood, there was another chapter in human history, one whose memory continues to shape our imagination of the past. The stones remain, the myths remain, and the questions remain. Did a civilization exist before the flood, one whose works now stand as puzzles too great for our explanations? Or are these only fragments of imagination, shaped by fear of water, fire, and time? What is certain is that memory has survived. In ruins carved with impossible skill, in symbols etched into rock, and in stories passed across oceans, the legacy of the lost world endures. We may never know its full shape, but its presence continues to guide our curiosity, reminding us that history is never as complete as it seems. If these mysteries intrigue you, join us again as we explore the forgotten, the unexplained, and the impossible. Subscribe for more journeys into the silent past, where questions outlast answers, and where the ruins of worlds still wait to speak.